across the galaxy. This is where conspiracy on the wild side meets the perspective of a lifetime. This is the Free Zone with your host, Freeman.
Hello and welcome to the Free Zone. Well, I don't know what to believe. It seems objective truth has gone out the window, and if you can make some people think it's possible, then you've sown the seeds of uncertainty. We are looking deep into a strange world where they have now created sheeple. Yes, folks, that's very true. Sheep-human hybrids have been made in the lab. You can get the facts at National Geographic. You can find it on my Twitter feed. I hope that you're following me at Freeman TV. Yes, I mean, we live in a time where human cloning is the norm. And yet, when you mention the term human cloning, immediately people throw you out into the range of the bizarre and unusual. But yet, we have seen numerous chimera coming to play. We've seen glow-in-the-dark cats, pigs, and sheep. And now they are creating sheeple. And I know it sounds bizarre, and I know it sounds like it's not true, but you can get the facts, and there are objective facts, and you must realize human cloning is occurring. It's just they don't bring them to life. And this is not secret. This is not some deep state. This is public news all over the place, but you throw it out, people, and they don't believe it. On the other end, you can make them believe whatever they want to believe, and that is the state of our planet right now. So we're going to dig deeper into this, folks. I have invited a working class hero that's leaving dystopian, a Renaissance man, artist with a labor of love, Mike Williams, the host of Sage of Quay, and bringing you free and critical thinking. Please welcome to the show, Mike Williams. Hi, Mike. How are you doing today?
Well, Freeman, I'm doing well, and thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure.
Well, I felt like I've been in the shallow end of the swimming pool for too long, and I'm ready to dig deeper into this POCO situation. Mike, a lot of what I've said in this early introduction actually comes from one of the latest X-Files episode. It's been known as the Mandela Effect episode, but it's actually titled The Lost Art of Forehead Sweat. And honestly, this has been one of my biggest complaints in current times, is that people don't know what to believe anymore. You throw out a fact, like they have created sheeple, sheep-human hybrids, and people are like, that's crazy. And yet it's absolutely true. No matter how outlandish it sounds, it's mainstream science.
Yeah, it's very interesting how they will put truth out there. And when they do put, or I should say some semblance of the truth out there, Freeman, that people don't believe it. But when they'll put out deception and lies, people will embrace and adopt that. So it's a very interesting dynamic that we have with the human race, where what to believe becomes a challenge. And for those folks like yourself, me, and many, many others that are trying to get the truth out and to have people awaken to an alternative perspective on things, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And what winds up happening, I know, at least with me and my show, and it becomes very niche in the sense that, you have your base of loyal subscribers or people that come to my blog and so on. But for the most part, when you take a look around at the remainder of society, because we are a very small minority, contrary to how some in the truth community and the alternative research community, how they want to kind of perceive our involvement, we are a very small minority. The majority of the folks are essentially wandering around and not really sure of who they are, what their life's about, and many times not even concerned about what is the truth. They just take things at face value and they run with it, and they get back on the hamster wheel and they go on with their lives.
Without a doubt. Yeah. People don't really want to. Well, the internet has given us the opportunity to believe whatever you want to believe. I mean, if you don't want to believe something, you can just go to Snopes, right?
Exactly.
But yet there it is right in front of your face. I personally was covering deep space war news for quite some time. And I feel like all my hard work in science has been kind of tossed out with the current belief systems, when I think it's as fascinating as anything anyone could believe. I mean, CERN put a device up on the International Space Station called the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer, and it was built by a corporation called Grawlator. And Grawlator's corporate logo is a reptilian claw. One of the only signs we have of a Grawlator from our ancient past, this dinosaur. And this alpha magnetic spectrometer sees the anti-universe. And it was put up there by a corporation that uses reptiles as its corporate logo. You don't have to reach out that far in deep science to say things are much stranger than people think already.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's because people want to believe what it is that they believe. So you had mentioned, the internet is filled with all kinds of information. And what I try to explain to folks, Freeman, is that information doesn't mean it's truth. Information just means it's data. It's information that's out there. It could be good information, it could be bad information, and it could be everything in between. But what I have found is what the vast majority of folks do is they have a belief system. And what they want to do is they want to back into that belief system. They want to validate what it is they believe. So you putting out all of your information and doing all the due diligence and all the research, there's going to be an audience for that. There's no doubt about it. But the average person, either A, is not going to pay any attention to it, or they will find ways in which to debunk whatever it is that you're bringing forth so that they can feel better about their belief system. And that's a big problem that we have in general, trying to get humanity to come together and have an awakening and all that stuff, is because we are very fractured. Humanity is very fractured. Everybody is in their own little box, in their own little compartment, and throwing stones at each other, not cooperating with each other, not seeing eye to eye or any of that stuff. So, it's a tough row to hoe when you look at it from the perspective of, hey, we want to get the truth out there. We want to have people to critically think, even if, let's say, somebody doesn't agree with what it is I'm presenting or what you're presenting, but there's not even a bandwidth of having civil discourse, of being able to just sit there and say, okay, let me hear this out, because there could be information that's coming forth that I haven't discovered or I haven't heard of. And at the end of the day, maybe I'll turn the corner on it. Maybe I will say, okay, well, perhaps that is something that I should look at, or okay, I agree to disagree. But we don't have that. We have a lot of volatile name calling and fist fights and rock throwing. I mean, all over the place. It's I tell folks sometimes I try to be very positive all the time, but sometimes you look at it, you think to yourself, this is getting a little disheartening.
Yeah.
So I understand completely where you're coming from. You're putting the work out there, and you're like, well, where's the traction?
Well, yeah. I mean, I again, a personal note, I found that children could prove my Obama clone theory in the classroom. I give them all the data to do that. They write me and tell me, oh my God, that was awesome. My teachers were flabbergasted and I got an A. But an adult wouldn't even open that article. You know what I mean? They were like, this is just out there and I'm not even going to touch it.
Yeah, because they think it's ridiculous, because they are conditioned not to look at that stuff, not to look at anything that just might push the envelope, something that you mentioned earlier, and it's one of the taglines on my blog. Truth is indeed stranger than fiction, and it's so true. But you're correct that children are much more open, and because they don't have all that clutter and all of that noise that adults have after years and years and years of being indoctrinated and conditioned to believe a certain way or to think a certain way. Children still have that bandwidth of discovery and exploration, within their minds. They still have that creativity and imagination. Adults, however, the longer they go on in life, the more time that passes, a lot of that stuff, many times for many people, it dissipates. And for some, it just goes away completely. They don't critically think at all.
Absolutely. What's the need, right?
Right.
mean, we kind of live in the honey boo boo world. I mean, I can't believe that I am personally getting insider White House knowledge by watching Big Brother Celebrity.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know about this, but Omarosa is on the Big Brother Celebrity season this season. And she is saying, she's like, oh, well, I have to teach Sean Spicer how to say words. Oh, if you knew what was actually going on inside there, and I'm trying to fix it, but they won't allow me access to the president, you would be so scared. You should be extremely worried. And this is going out on Big Brother. So this, consider the audience is what I'm saying there.
No, absolutely. They communicate stuff out all the time, by the way, and it just goes over most people's heads.
Yeah. But now we're at a point where we're at like the idiocracy is real. White House members are on Big Brother giving us, warnings about the state of affairs. I mean, this has gone over the top for sure.
Yeah, well, it's a culture of celebrity. It's a culture of personality, the cult of personality. I tell my friends on Facebook, that we live in a cartoon world. We literally live in a comic book. When you're on the outside, that's how I feel many times. And I'm sure you feel the same way. I feel like I'm on the outside looking in and watching the world and watching this crazy, crazy place and what goes on. And many times I feel detached from it, because I just cannot believe how it has spiraled, right into the ground. And, and I'm 59 years old. So I'm not a young guy, I'm not an old guy, but, I remember back when things were much, much different. And so over the course of almost 60 years, I've seen a definite degradation in our society and our culture.
No doubt. In that lost art of forehead sweat on the X-Files, Mulder's screaming, I'm Fox Mulder. I'm Fox Mulder. I was into this before you ever saw your first chemtrail. Okay, now that's a quote from this, last week's X-Files. Now, when Prince came out in a story, he was on television, and he says, chemtrails are making all of my friends crazy. They're making them want to beat each other up. And this exploded all over the internet. Prince talks about chemtrails, this power of celebridom, and the need to control the narrative, where Prince talks about chemtrails on a talk show, ends up dead in an elevator. Chris Carter throws Fox Mulder talking about chemtrails, and they're just making fun of everything, creating phony fake news. So controlling the narrative has a lot to do with controlling who's presenting that narrative. And I know we wanted to get into today a topic of one of those icons and how the narrative got shifted. And we're talking about Paul McCartney and the Beatles. Right. This was a huge moment in the transition. I mean, what I literally call the British invasion, right? I mean, we that know of this story know that was a literal invasion, utilizing mind control of music with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and, even the Who. We had a full-on British invasion, and trying to keep the narrative and trying to keep the people in the place to tell the narrative seems to be part of what this story is. Do you want to tell us more about this Paul McCartney?
Paul McCartney, I'll just start this way, Freeman, because I think it's important to start this way. I did not believe the conspiracy for the longest time. And I remember growing up hearing about the conspiracy. And when I was in high school, I was a junior, I think, in 1976. I remember even having a friend of mine, his older brother, who was really into the Beatles, did a whole thing in my high school on the Paul is Dead clues, on the albums and so on. He did a great job. So I was very aware of it, but I was coming from the position that it was done as a marketing ploy that it was done to sell more records, and it was just one of these, tongue-in-cheek types of things that, the Beatles would do. So I was not a believer in the conspiracy, and when people would ask me about it or approach me about it, I would have had a very similar response that many people still have today is, oh, it's ridiculous. How could they possibly find somebody, that looks like him, sounds like him, plays like him, and all that stuff? But I really wasn't paying attention. It's really what happened. And what it came down to was I had a belief system. And it's just like we were talking about before. And I wasn't moving off that belief system. I just believed that wasn't worth spending my time on. It's ridiculous. He wasn't replaced. It's the same guy. I'm not going to listen to any of this. Interesting. The clues are interesting and all that stuff. It's fun to go find them on the albums. It's fun to play the songs backwards. I did all that stuff. But at the end of the day, Paul McCartney did not die, or Paul McCartney was not replaced. So then what happened is I wound up reading a book called The Memoirs of Billy Shears, and the author, who was referred to actually as the encoder, Tom Harriet, 666 pages, 66 chapters, and the book is an amazing piece of work in that it spills the beans, and it comes from a first-person perspective, and the person who's speaking is a person by the name of William Wallace Sheppard, Bill Sheppard. Others will know him as Billy Shears. Shears is a play off of the last name Sheppard. And others will prefer to call him William Campbell or Billy Campbell. So I tell folks when I have conversations about this, I'm not really concerned about his surname. It could be Sheppard, Shears, Campbell. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it was a gigantic psyop that was put in play by Tavistock. So all of these bands, the Beatles, and we'll pick on the Beatles and the Stones because they were the two most prominent and famous coming out of the British invasion, they're Tavistock projects. And this is something that's explained very thoroughly in the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears. And I recommend it. Let me say this before I say what I was going to say. I don't have anything to do with this book. So, there's no financial connection to it, any of that stuff. So if you're interested in this topic and you want to know more about it, then go read that book and a lot of questions will be answered. So it was an experiment, Freeman, in my opinion, by Tavistock to see how far they can push the envelope with replacing somebody at a point in time when they were at their peak. In 1966, the Beatles were at the top of the rock and roll pile, right? At the top of the mountain. And Paul McCartney and John Lennon were arguably the two most famous musicians in the world. And they had tremendous amounts of television time. People knew who they were. Even if you weren't a Beatle fan, you knew who the Beatles were. You knew who Paul McCartney was and John Lennon and George Harrison and Ringo Starr. And then in late 1966, they swapped out biological Paul McCartney. I call him biological Paul. And they replaced him with another person. And this person, according to the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears, is William Sheppard, Bill Sheppard. And Sheppard was a known longtime session musician out in the UK. He can read, write, and score music. Right. So he was an accomplished musician. In the book, he explains that he was nurtured and moved along at a very early age with regard to his musical skills and his musical talents by his uncle, who was a very, very high level Freemason. He admits this in the book. So 1966, the last album that biological Paul McCartney played on was Revolver. And then in December of 1966, there was an album that was released called A Collection of Oldies. And a lot of people don't know about this album. It was released out in the UK. I'm not sure it made it here in the United States. And on the cover of that album, it's a very psychedelic album cover. And there's a man on the front cover. And you have to look really, really hard to find the word The Beatles. It's called A Collection of Oldies. And again, on the front cover is this guy. He's dressed in a very psychedelic type of outfit. The album is essentially a greatest hits of the Beatles. I call it phase one of the Beatles. Biological Paul, that phase. Going from 1963, the Please Please Me album, up through 1966. But the question that you have to ask yourself is, why would an album in 1966, which covered songs from 1964, 65, and 66, why would it be called a collection of oldies? It should have been called a greatest hits album, or greatest hits to date, or greatest hits so far. What it was a stake in the ground. They were introducing this new member of the Beatles, Bill Sheppard. He is the same person that played the character of Phil Ackrell in The Diplomats with Denny Laine. So this is very important to remember. The relationship between the guy that we know as Paul McCartney today, who I call Bill Sheppard, his relationship with Denny Laine goes way back into the early 1960s. I'll jump ahead a little bit. So when the Beatles were over, when it ended, and Sheppard formed a new band, Wings, who did he bring back into the fold? He brought back his old friend, Denny Laine. And later on, we'll talk about Denny Laine spilling the beans back in, I think it was 2016 on an interview. We'll get to that in a little bit. So anyway, we had this collection of oldies, and then that was basically a point in time where they were announcing in a very subtle way that there's going to be a new guy in the band, replacing the old guy. And then in 1967, there was the release of Sgt. Pepper, and Pepper was the very first album that Bill Sheppard played on as a Beatle. Now, the thing is, Sheppard had been in the pipeline for a long time, and I don't subscribe to necessarily that biological Paul is actually dead. Some people have asked me this. They said, well, Mike, you think he died? I said, no. I was on shows, especially the first show, what I did with Sophia Smallstorm, when Sophia and I talked about it, I was talking about the book. And in the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears, it says that Paul McCartney did die in a car crash on Sunday, September 11th, 1966. But it is possible that he didn't die. It's possible that he was just replaced. And so they bring this guy Sheppard in. So the question would be, all right, so if he was replaced, why did they bring Sheppard in? They brought Bill Sheppard in because the Beatles, being a Tavistock project, Tavistock was using them for social engineering and conditioning. And in 1967, that was the Summer of Love. And Sgt. Pepper kicked off the psychedelic era. And that was Bill Sheppard's job. Bill Sheppard's job was a couple of things. One, it was to replace biological Paul McCartney, number one. Number two was to essentially be the de facto Beatle leader and handler inside the band, and to steer the band now in a completely different direction. And that direction at the time, again, was a psychedelic era. So the record was released in June of 1967. Then 2 months later, Brian Epstein dies, a few days before his 33rd birthday. So all these numbers come into play too. When you take a look at the montage of pictures of Paul McCartney over time, go back to 1963, 64, 65, where it was biological Paul. And I had actually put this collage together, and it made its way around all over the place. It started on Facebook at first, and then it went into my presentations when I was talking about this topic, and I found it wound up in Google searches and all that. What I did was I took two slides, and I did make a third one, but I had two primary slides where I showed biological Paul, 1964, 65, and then I showed a litany of McCartney pictures going from 1966 on at various points. And what you can clearly see is it's not the same person. In fact, even between 1966 and present day, you can make an argument that there's more than one replacement during that time period between 66 and current day. But clearly, the pictures of the McCartney that we were shown post 66 are not the same guy that was playing in the band from 63, 64, 65 up through the fall of 1966, September. So what happened was, and a lot of people, we were talking about before, people don't believe things. They just don't want to believe it. But Sheppard, again, he played Phil Ackrell in The Diplomats. He was also played the character Vivian Stanshall. Vivian Stanshall was very popular in the UK, did a lot of vaudeville types of stuff. He was in the band with Neil Innes, and Neil Innes later on was one of the creative personalities behind the Ruddles, which was a parody of the Beatles. So what you're seeing is, what I'm getting to here is all a big club, and all of these guys are all tied into each other. Sheppard's tied to Lane. Lane and Sheppard are tied to Neil Innes. These guys all know each other. They're all Freemasons. They're all in secret societies. And that's the reason why when people turn around and say, well, somebody would have said something. No, because the people that were in the know were people that are in the club. In the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears, as an example, Sheppard explains that the Who knew, the Stones knew. In fact, in the book, he says that Mick Jagger was quite irritated by the fact that Sheppard had filled in, and he actually stepped into the shoes of biological Paul McCartney. And by the sheer fact that he just took over the role, he took on the fame instantaneously. And that bothered Jagger because Jagger was looking at it and saying, this guy didn't pay his dues. I mean, I we're here writing songs and doing this and doing that. And this guy steps in and all of a sudden he's got fame and fortune. And it wasn't until later that Mick Jagger finally had the respect for Sheppard because he saw that Sheppard was actually an extremely talented guy. So what happened was, in order to make the transition, I hope I'm not jumping around. I hope this is making sense to everybody. So in order to make the transition from Revolver and that little segue album, A Collection of Oldies, where they introduced, that's Bill Sheppard on the front cover, folks. That's him. If you take a look at old Vivian Stanshall performances, that's how Stanshall used to dress. But what they did, Freeman, was with Sgt. Pepper, they changed everything. They didn't just change Paul McCartney, swap him out, replace him. They changed the appearance of all of the Beatles, and they introduced them as a new band, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The album cover was striking, all of its psychedelic perceptions, and you took a look at each of the Beatles. They were very different. They were no longer these mop tops, long sideburns and beards and the colorful band outfits and all that. What Tavistock did, and they're working, of course, with British intelligence on this, is they just made everything look different. Everything changed. So when you looked at it, you're like, wow. I mean, the Beatles really changed. These guys have really evolved. They've grown up now. And so what happened was you didn't focus that much on Paul McCartney. So what you did was you focused on the big picture. And just by the sheer fact that McCartney or Sheppard was there as McCartney amongst the other Beatles, people just looked at that and said, well, that's Paul McCartney. Nobody questioned it. Whereas if they had left the Beatles looking the way they did from their Rubber Soul and Revolver era, and then introduced Sheppard, there's a very high probability there would have been a lot more questions about that doesn't look like Paul that we used to know. But by changing the entire picture, changing the scenery completely, it worked. So that's what Tavistock did, and there were times when it got a little dicey, especially based on the fact that Sheppard is not naturally left-handed; he's right-handed.
I was just reflecting on that time period, and I was thinking about Revolver and Rubber Soul and how much those albums were like, hey, girl, I'm going to come and kill you, to the transition of the psychedelic era. I mean, if you listen to the Revolver and Rubber Soul, you really think that the Beatles hate women and want to burn them to the ground. But then at that same time that you're talking about, around the era of Sgt. Pepper's, the Beatles just stopped touring altogether.
That's right.
They said they were too frightened to go out there. The fans were too fanatical, and it's just not worth it.
Yeah, they had said that actually Brian Epstein had made the announcement that they weren't going to tour anymore. They said it was too chaotic, that it was inhibiting their creativity, being on the road. They wanted to do more stuff in the studio. They wanted to experiment and all that stuff. So what was really happening at that time was, well, yes, indeed, they were in the studio working very diligently on the new phase 2 of the Beatles, the Bill Sheppard era, working on Pepper. In total cahoots with George Martin, who was also a very high level Freemason, as was, in my opinion, Brian Epstein, Sheppard as well. He admits this in the book that he's a very high level Freemason. In fact, I believe that he is in the illuminated degrees today, which is above the 33rd degree.
Well, let me throw this at you real quick.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the hashtag Enough is Enough campaign yet?
I have heard of it, but I don't know much about it.
It's essentially the Freemasons saying, hey, quit blaming us for everything.
Yeah.
So they in Westminster they've come together and they've gotten so many articles from the Guardian and the World Post and others that were saying that they had too much power, that, you know, Freemasons, we can see it over from Jack the Ripper up to the New York police scandal of finding all the Masons inside. And they're saying they want Masons to identify themselves for powers of position. And the Masons have come back with a hashtag enough is enough campaign to try and say, look, we're not the nefarious force that rules the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course they're going to say that. And here's the thing. Not all Masons are nefarious. Not all Masons are running around trying to undermine the rest of humanity. But, you know, when you do the research, it's just a fact that, you know, Freemasonry has been around for a very, very, very long time. And they are the overarching secret society where other secret societies are tucked in under.
Yeah, let me clarify for people just to make sure so folks know. You can go to the New York Grand Lodge and you can see of Freemasonry. You can see all the people that created Hollywood. They've got their bronze statues, pictures, everything there. You can go to the Supreme Council in Washington, D.C., right, and walk down the aisle of famous Freemasons. These things are not hidden. You know, all the presidents, the Buzz Aldrin. You can go to the Grand Lodge of Sydney, Australia, and all along the walls is every prime minister in his apron. So, you know, to say that we're not in charge of these things, and yet they own, you know, Roy Kroc of McDonald's is a Mason, Walt Disney Co. is Masonry, and we're going to get to Disney in the second hour. It's pretty obvious if you just go to their lodges and learn that these are the men in power. I don't know how they could try and claim that they're not.
Well, of course they're going to try to say that they're not, Freeman. And the thing is, and that's part of a psyop too, right? It's basically to sit there and screw with people's heads and, you know, we're not bad guys, and we're, you know, and they're not all bad guys. I know people that are Masons and, you know, I mean, they're not up to bad stuff. But what happens is, you know, it's a hierarchy, and the most intrepid are those that are tapped to move into positions of power and influence, and in order to maintain the control that they have. And as you just mentioned, I mean, if you take a look at the media, if you take a look at the news, you take a look at the military, take a look at your police departments, take a look wherever you want to look, where there's power and influence and institutions, they were the Freemasons. I mean, the United States was founded on Freemasonry. It wasn't founded on Christianity. And this is another thing that when I have conversations with folks, they get upset about. You know, they want to believe it's a Christian nation. Well, Christian maybe from the standpoint of the people that came over, you know, from the Church of England and so on. But the people who were actually running things, the power structure, the power apparatus was Masonic. You know, just take a look at George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and all of them, Madison. So you're absolutely right. Secret societies run the show. And that's just, I don't know what to tell folks. You know, a lot of people don't want to believe that. They want to believe that there is no focal point, that there is no controlling mechanism in place. But I'm sorry to say that there is. There always has been. You know, a lot of it is coming to light today because a lot of people are doing research. And as we mentioned before, there's a lot of information out there and people are starting to connect dots. But yeah, I mean, they're in control. And you know, in the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears, Sheppard has a whole chapter on the Masonic influences of the Beatles, how Freemasonry played an instrumental role in the whole creation of the Beatles. And
same could be said for the Grateful Dead.
Yes, the Grateful Dead, exactly. Jim Morrison and the rest of these guys, all these bands that came out of Laurel Canyon as an example.
Yeah. And even basketball and baseball, folks, they were both created by Freemasons proudly. Yeah. So Shaquille O'Neal, you know, proudly showing his Masonic ring on television. Yep. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Obama walking around with his ring. He used to wear a Masonic ring. He was, you know, photographed wearing one. And so that's part of the problem we have, Freeman, is that to convince people or try to convince them that there are controllers, that there are people that control. They control virtually, if not all aspects of what you're involved in on a daily basis. They control the banks, they control your schools, they control your medicine, they control your media, They control your government. And we can go on and on and on and on this thing. And it's just very difficult for people to get their heads wrapped around the fact that that type of control exists. I don't know what people believe, what they really think is going on, that just people just kind of wandering around and doing their own thing with no real semblance of control in place. I mean, if you're thinking that's just not how the world works. I mean, there is a lot of control in our lives on any given day. I mean, simply, if you want to drive your car, you have to have a license. You have to register your car. You have to have it inspected. These are all commerce terms, and this is all admiralty law and maritime law that's coming into play, right? So something as simple as driving your car is not freedom, right? If you own a home and you pay off your mortgage, you still have to pay property taxes. What's a property tax? A property tax is a perpetual lien on your property. It means that you never own your land. It means you're a tenant. So, and if you don't pay your property taxes, what will the controllers do? What will the state do? Well, they will not only take your land, they'll take the house that's on it that you own. You see, so that is where people really have to start thinking. And sometimes what I try to do with folks, I know I'm diverting off the Paul McCartney thing here. Okay. I try to get people to understand the more basic premises like the property tax thing, because when I have that conversation with folks, Freeman, a lot of times they will just sit back and like, well, I just never thought about that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's usually what happens,
Yeah.
It's just the way it is,
It's just the way it is. Yeah. So anyway, but with the McCartney thing, like I said, they pulled the rug out, they put another guy in, and there was a lot of reconstructive surgery that was done and fillers. It wasn't a facelift, folks. A lot of reconstructive surgery had taken place to give him more of that McCartney look. And for those that don't believe that he played Vivian Stanshall, then I suggest that you go back and take a look at Vivian Stanshall, earlier versions of Stanshall. That was Bill Sheppard. By the way, he's from Scotland. He's a Scotsman. His lineage goes back to William Wallace, the famed Scottish warrior that was played by Mel Gibson in the film Braveheart. He talks about that in the book, and he's very proud of his heritage.
Which is basically when the Templar joined the Masons.
Yes, and what it's saying is it's bloodlines. You see, that's the other thing. Bloodlines are very, very important. He's blue blood. So you got this guy, Sheppard, who took over the reins of the Beatles, and he has been in play ever since. There have been others that have filled in. He admits this in the book. He says that there are others that have stepped in to play the role from a cameo perspective, or maybe even a gig. He doesn't go into great detail on that. He just says there were others, but he says he's the one with the long-term contract. So he's under contract. He has signed non-disclosures and confidentiality agreements, otherwise known as secrecy agreements. And when Memoirs was released back in September, was released on September 9th, 2009, 999, right? The book is referred to as historical fiction, and he explains it very clearly in the book why it has to be that way, because there has to be a thread of fiction in the book so that he doesn't jeopardize his fortune, have a breach of his contracts that he signed, because he can lose everything. When the book was written, his attorneys were involved every inch of the way to make sure that what was being presented in the book can be presented. As an example, he mentions in the book that he wanted to talk more about his relatives, his descendants, and they said, no, don't do that. You can't do that, because if you do that, what's going to happen, Bill, is you're actually formulating a foundation there where people are going to be able to dig further and research, and it could hose things up. So he left that out. And some people will say, well, maybe he's lying about the name Sheppard. He could be, and I don't discard that either. Like I said, I'm not really concerned about his surname. What I was most focused on, and what really amazes me in this whole thing with the McCartney conspiracy, Freeman, is the fact that the guy was replaced and really nobody cared. Nobody really saw it. I mean, there were some people that called it out, especially when the rumor had become hot and heavy back in 1969. But then, it died down, and he went about his business. And today he's still known as Paul McCartney. And the name
Paul McCartney.
Sir Paul McCartney, that's right. and Sir is, when you get the title of Sir, that's service to the crown, service to the Illuminati. So you have
right that Johnny Rotten has refused every time.
Exactly, exactly. And then you talk about the MBEs and all that stuff. I mean, this is all stuff that is given to players in the system that have done well. In other words, you're doing a good job in support of the Illuminati, of the controllers, of however you want to define the people that are in power.
Well, let's consider this real quick.
Yeah.
The film, The Devil's Double. Have you seen this?
I don't know. I don't think I have.
It's based on actual events. The Devil's Double recounts the remarkable tale of Latif Yahya, an Iraqi army lieutenant who was summoned to Saddam Hussein's palace in 1987 in order to become his body double. And what we find in this movie is that there are numerous doubles made by people like Saddam Hussein and others. And what happens in the movie is that the actual people, Saddam Hussein and another double from the CIA, I think, I don't remember exactly now, the doubles end up meeting in the meetings instead of the actual dictators and heads of state and stuff. The doubles are meeting in the actual political arena, and the other characters are back at home golfing or doing whatever they want to do. This is a true story. I mean, we know that this is done, and yet people will still say, "Oh, this is outlandish." And yet we got signs of this all over the place, movies made about it, which actually was released September 8th, 2011. So we're at 8/11 there, but 9/11 being September. Yeah, man. Wow. That's the thing. Objective truth, phony fake news, presenting true facts written so that no one will believe them.
That's right. It's all a deception. It's all a deception, and it's all conditioning, and it's mind control, and it's making you believe what they want you to believe, make you think what they want you to think, give you values that it's the values they want you to have. And that's the thing, most people don't have an original thought. Everything that comes out of their minds, it's in their minds, I should say, and comes out of their mouths is not original. What they're really doing is they're regurgitating a scenario, a script, an environment that was pounded into them. And people sit in front of the television sets all the time and just taking in all this garbage, and I've done shows on, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a hypnotherapist. That's what I am by trade. And I've actually broken down, on television, what's happening there. It's all hypnosis on television, all of it.
Right.
And people are just soaking all this stuff up. And that's what we have. So everything, like I told Oli Damagard before we started the show, Freeman, just about anything worth knowing, and I'm probably going to correct that now and say, or I should say update it, say everything worth knowing is a lie. And in the business of the music business, Sheppard, he doesn't look at what he's doing as something that is like deceptive. He just says, it's just show business. That's all it is. It's just show business. It happens all the time, folks. So don't get alarmed by it, and don't get upset and angry about it and everything else. It's just show business. So just chill out.
No reason for them to create the hippie movement.
Exactly.
Just like there was no reason for them to create the truther movement.
Right. That's right.
I've been saying that since 9/11. You guys were intended. You are expected. If you think that they didn't think there was going to be an opposing force and write you into the script, then you're just bonkers. You are part of the plan.
Yeah, that's a big problem, I think, that a lot of truthers have, is that they believe that the truth movement and many, many, many facets and aspects of the truth movement are organic, and they're not. They're not. The people that are controlling, the people that are in power, and I'm talking about not the people that we see. I'm talking about the unseen. They've got this stuff figured out every which way from Sunday. You're not going to pull any surprises on them. And if by some strange turn of events that something does take them by surprise, their ability to recover and to be able to get back on track is amazing. And that's because they control all of the vehicles that matter. They control your media. They control your academia. They control the whole corporate structure. People go to work, in corporations, all this stuff. So, the magnitude of the control for many people, Freeman, is just absolutely mind-boggling. And that's why they can't get their heads wrapped around it. That's why they can't really embrace it.
Now, here's, Mike, a true statement really is that they don't need to constantly put doubles or manufacture the artist or pay them to keep silent, any of these things, because they create the culture.
Yes.
So you create the culture and a Marilyn Manson's going to rise. And then you, with the power, can make sure that he's in front of everyone. But you didn't have to go and say, hey, you're going to be this satanic Nazi character and we're going to pay you to perform like this. You just simply create a satanic Nazi culture.
Yes.
And something will come in to fill the role. Then you lift that up to everyone's perception, right?
It's absolutely right, Freeman. That's what they do. They create it and then they market it. And they have the vehicles. I mean, the vehicles that they have to put it out there, nobody could compete with it. They own everything.
People's thinking and the way that they retain or accept information, it has been clearly shown that more people believe a post in a Twitter or a Facebook feed if that feed has more followers.
Right.
So all of a sudden, critical thinking's out of the window. This guy has a lot of followers. He obviously must be listened to by a bunch of people. I should believe what he says. When, of course, we know from Twitter bots and all of this, the Russian election and such, that all of these are fake numbers. Whether you're up or down, it's all just fraudulent. But the perception of people is, I'm going to believe this one because so many other people do.
Yeah, it's herd mentality. I remember having conversations with folks about, some of the stuff that I get into, and they'll say, well, you realize, Mike, that you're in the minority, that the majority of people do not think the way you do. And they're talking to me as if like, you need to get on board, Mike. You need to get on track because you're a weirdo. And it goes along with what you're saying is people want to be part of the crowd. They want to be part of that herd. At the end of the day, most people want to be accepted. They don't want to be standing on the outside and being ridiculed or being told that they're crazy, they're a tinfoil hat wearer, or they're a conspiratard, all these things that I've been called, over time. And the thing is, once you do this and you're into it for a while, like yourself, me, and many, many others, I mean, you get very thick skin and that stuff does not bother you anymore because, it just doesn't. You know that you're on a track to get the truth out, and it's important that you be on that track and you continue on despite all of the ridicule. But in the beginning, I'll just use myself as an example, it was tough. It was tough being, told that you're crazy. And when you extrapolate that and you take it to the rest of the population, people don't want to be called nuts. And so they will converge on that herd and running with the pack. That's what they want to do. They want to run with the pack. I want to be maybe a little different, but not so different that I stand out. And that's conditioning too, because what they've done is they've taken the uniqueness out of the human, out of the human spirit, and they've taken it out of your environment. I mean, if you take a look around you, take a look at automobiles as an example. I was just thinking about this the other day. All the cars today look alike. There's no more uniqueness to them. Back in the 1960s when I was growing up, you could tell a Mustang from a Dodge Charger, a Charger from a Camaro. Today, you take a look around, like this, all the stuff looks the same. If you go into a development where people live and take a look at the homes, all the homes look the same. If you go shopping someplace, I mean, all the stores are all chains and franchises. They all look the same. They're laid out the same way, Oh
my God, in Florida, I can't even tell when I've hit another town. I mean, I'm like, wait a minute. Just deja vu after deja vu.
So that's the thing. It's going back to your point. It's they've taken the uniqueness out and they want people to conform. It's to conform and stay within the pack. Don't leave the reservation. Okay, stay on the reservation. And that's where most people are at. They're on the reservation.
Without a doubt, it is a very strange time to live. I mean, even Fox Mulder said the world's too crazy for my conspiratorial powers to even fathom.
No, but it is a good time to live, though, and I get this question asked a lot, too. It's like, well, Mike, don't you go, doesn't this drive you crazy, doing this, and you're not seeing much movement? And, I was talking to Max Egan a few months ago, and, I said to Max, I asked him the question. I said, Max, is there an awakening? He goes, Mike, it's not an awakening. He goes, I see an awareness, but it's not this awakening. It's happening at an exponential rate. All right. And now there are going to be folks that don't agree with Max or with me, because I agree with Max on that point. But, that's how I kind of size it up. There's an awareness. I don't know. Like I said, we have to keep going, though, Freeman. As frustrating as it could be many times to be able to try to get the word out, and you're not seeing a lot of movement or a lot of people, grabbing onto things and becoming interested. You have to keep going, because we are touching people, even if it's one person, and then that person touches somebody, and then that's how it kind of grows. So we have to keep going. You can't go back to the Matrix. I was in the Matrix for years, Freeman. I had my corporate job and all that and everything else. I was asleep. I was one of the people on the reservation, and and now knowing what I know today, not to say I know everything, but which I don't, but based upon what I do know, going back is not an option.
It really isn't. It really isn't. And for me, I'm not giving up on my Obama clone theory one bit. It's probable and it's possible. And, if they were going to bring anyone back, it would be Akhenaten. They honor him in every Grand Lodge of Freemasonry. The entire family, children look at the picture and like, oh my God. I mean, especially Michelle Obama looking like Queen T. You can't even tell the faces are split. So you've got that in front of your face, just like the Paul and Faux, biological Paul and fake Paul. You got the picture right in your face, and you're like, this is crazy. And then that cloning is happening. That gene splicing is happening.
Oh, yeah.
You know that they worship this character. And then, for me on this latest level, and I haven't brought this up yet, Mike, so I figured I'd throw it in here, the Obama portrait.
Yeah.
Now, if you're at all familiar, folks, with Akhenaten, then you know that the biggest complaint Egypt had with Akhenaten was that he wouldn't conform to the standards of pharaonic ideals. And he depicted himself too often with flowers and with his children playing. And this was just not acceptable as a pharaoh. And it was one of the biggest complaints of Akhenaten's time. So now you throw up a collection of presidential portraits and stick Obama's in the center, and which one does not fit? Well, the one with all the flowers and the leaves and the plants in there, that is exactly what Akhenaten did. And then Obama is building this presidential library in Chicago, which will not house a single book. And it is a massive Egyptian structure. And of course, it was designed by Meryl Streep's husband. He had a large role in the design of this thing. And so here is, Akhenaten continuing with 2,500 years of history, doing the exact same thing he did back, 2,500 years ago, by depicting himself with flowers and leaves, and does not fit. So, I can't help but just keep going. Oh my God, this just doesn't end. It just doesn't end. I keep waiting for it to end, but it's not going to.
It's not going to end, Freeman. It's not going to end because it's just so, existence is nowhere even close to what people believe it to be. People want to believe that it's all in a nice little box and there's a bow slapped on top of it. And when you start to really dig into this stuff, you're absolutely right about the cloning. If anybody thinks that they're not cloning and they don't have the ability to do this,
it's in the news, Mike. I mean, if you go and you look up the International Space Station, there are over 30 human cloning projects openly discussed on NASA's website for human longevity, seeking immortality on the International Space Station. This is what I'm sorry to be blown out here, because when we say the words human cloning, you might as well say flat Earth. You might as well say, but it's the president released federal funding. Barack Obama released federal funding for human cloning because there was no money in it. And we now have sheeple. They're creating cloned sheep hybrids, and it's in National Geographic. We're not talking about Paranoia magazine,
Yeah, under
human
the guise
cloning is
Yeah.
common, and it's happened forever. But people hear those words, human cloning, and they think bringing this body to life. They've cloaked it in the term stem cell research.
Exactly.
But you clone stem cells, folks. That is cloning humans. And they brought those sheeple to life. They allowed them to live in the womb for 29 days before the clone and kill, which is what Barack Obama funded. Technology was put into place. Yeah, you let them grow. I mean, what they're doing with these sheeple, they have taken sheep, they've pulled out their embryo, they've taken it, they've inserted a human DNA, and they have removed the factor inside of the sheep DNA that will grow a particular body part. The one in question is a pancreas. And so when the sheep is born, it does not have the genetic coding to grow a pancreas, but it has the human code to grow a pancreas. And so it grows a human pancreas that we can then take.
Right. They can harvest. Yep.
Yeah. And so when you say human cloning, Mike, people all of a sudden it's like out there in the ether when it's been news for a decade.
The technology that they have, Freeman, not just in the area of cloning, but everywhere, is so much more advanced, so far advanced, that it goes beyond science fiction in many cases. And that's the thing, people.
But that's my point, is we don't even have to go to advanced sciences. We don't even have to go to DARPA to find that they're cloning humans. It's in National Geographic.
Right. That's right. That's right. And they're telegraphing it. They're putting it out there. And I found it interesting, and maybe it's just me being, a little conspiracy crazy guy, that they did it with sheep, so they can call it sheeple. Yeah. So
they're laughing, man. They're laughing.
Yeah, they're getting a good chuckle out of it, and like you said, they're laughing.
Just to conclude the thought, real quick.
Yeah.
What was the final outcome of replacing Paul McCartney?
Well, the final outcome was that they continued on with their Tavistock project, which was, like I said, it was a grand experiment in social engineering, and also, I believe, a grand experiment in how much the public can be led, how much they can be deceived without even knowing it. And that, to me, is a huge piece, because, like I said earlier on, when I first started the McCartney discussion, they took one of the most famous musicians, entertainers of the time, and they swapped him out. Forget about whether he died or not, or replaced. Doesn't matter. They swapped this guy out. And it happened, and nobody cared. And everybody, mostly everybody, I can't say everybody, but the vast majority of the folks that were following the Beatles, they didn't notice. So Tavistock had to sit back and say to themselves, this is unbelievable. This is truly unbelievable. We put a different person in there, okay? And nobody questioned it. So I think something like that is just an eye-opener for them. I think it opens up the floodgates to what it is now that they believe that they can do. Well, if I can get you to believe that, well, I've got a lot of other stuff now in my desk drawer here that I'm going to go play out. Right. So that's what I think. That's what I think was a big piece of it. I think in the beginning they were shaky about it, like, I don't know, this might not work. But then once they saw it work, they're like, you know what? This is good. This is good. I've
always thought that with the creation of Hollywood, when they suddenly realized that they could put a talentless hack Satanist on television and make everyone love them.
Yep, that's exactly right. And most of these people that we're watching in movies and so on.
Sammy Davis Jr. is who I was referring to.
Sammy Davis Jr. Okay, there's a lot of.
He's a talentless hack Satanist that became a social icon with the other Satanist, like Frank Sinatra and others. But I mean, Sammy Davis Jr. was an open Satanist.
Yes. The thing is, it continues on today, Freeman. So when we take a look even today, fast forward 40, 50 years from when Sammy Davis Jr. first, hit the scene, or his height of popularity, because I remember watching him on like the Dean Martin show when I was a kid. That's how old I am, folks. And take a look at today. It's the same thing. You have talentless hacks that have bought into the satanic system, and these people are celebrities, and these are people that are being idolized by the masses. I mean, it's completely and totally out of control.
Without a doubt. And we looked at so many conspiratorial levels of this puzzle that we're covering here, Mike. And you had mentioned in the memoirs of Billy Shears with 66 chapters and
Yes.
666 pages.
Right.
Well, the day that Walt Disney Co. reportedly bought Fox and all its subsidiaries, FX and everything else, for $66 billion was the day the Dow, the stock market, dropped 666 points.
Yep, that's right. In fact, I put the Dow going down 666 on my Facebook page, and there were a handful of people that got it, and everybody else, I'm sure, was like, wow, "What the hell is this guy talking about?"
Yeah, I know. That's the world we live in. You're on one end or the other, man. There's no in between. The rest of us have enough evidence now that we know we're onto something, because it plays out, and the rest of the people are just, in the matrix, I guess. And 66 happens to be the number of the beast, or not the beast, the number of the abyss.
Yeah.
Or according to a magician's dictionary, that 66 is the number of the great work. So basically 66 could be seeming the same symbol as the eye in the pyramid.
Yeah. And they love their numbers. So they paint by the numbers, right? So it's not just that, right? All of these recent school shootings, every time you take a look at, the numbers that are all around these shootings, all of their numbers, their occulted numbers are just embedded. The sixes, the 66s, the 911s, the sevens, double sevens, triple sevens, eights, 88s. These are all occulted numbers, right? And it's all there. And but unfortunately, like 99.9999% of the population has no clue. So you and I can have a conversation about it, and that's great. It's good that I could have a conversation with somebody else other than myself on this stuff. But the vast majority of the folks out there, they don't have a clue.
Yeah. And, want to conclude this hour with more of the X-Files recent Mandela effect episode, which we're going to get into, folks, in the next hour. A lot of the thoughts about Mandela, flat Earth. Let's go to the deep end, folks. Another quote from that X-Files: "The point wasn't meant to find the truth, but to find each other." And even though it came from Chris Carter, I couldn't agree with it more. No one actually has to believe all of everything, and we don't need to beat people's heads with knowledge. We now know that we can detach from the system that has enslaved us, and that's the true gift of learning this conspiracy theory. Wouldn't you agree with that, Mike?
I do agree with that, Freeman. Absolutely.
Now, you put out some amazing music. I love that Renaissance people are the ones that are in this. We're all artists, and I think that's why we see these type of patterns a little bit more, because we're more artists than we are academic. So I was really excited and enjoyed your music quite a bit, and I want to share all of your work with our listening audience. So folks, we've got thesageofquay.com, where Mike hosts his radio program. How long have you been going with that, Sage of Quay? Boy, I see you popping up all the time.
Yeah, the radio show itself, Freeman, is 4 years old. But before that, I had the blog. And the blog was, I think I started the blog back in 2012. I think 2012 it was. So the blog's been going around 6 years or so, 6+, and the radio show 4 years.
Fantastic. And your musical project, the laboroflovemusic.com. Is that something you focus a lot on, or was it a project that you would just do for your enjoyment?
Well, I've been a musician almost all my life. So I picked up the guitar as a kid, and, ironically enough, it was because of the Beatles.
Right.
But I really started getting going with the guitar around, 14, 15 years old. And then fast forward, in 2011, I decided that I was going to formally put out an album. So I put out my first album, Leaving Dystopia. It was released in February of 2013, but I worked on it almost all of 2012. And then I got so caught up with the radio shows and my practice as a hypnotherapist and other stuff in my life. It took 5 years for me to release the second album, and that's what's out. It's going to be released, I should say, this month on the 27th, so February 27th. And the new album is entitled Hollow Moon. So those are the two albums that I have out currently. And going forward, what I'm going to do is just release singles. As the music comes, I'm going to record them and release them.
Awesome. Well, folks, we are definitely going to be leaving dystopia and discussing a hollow moon on the other side. Without a doubt, Mike Williams is a great guest and someone I love to be able to bounce these ideas and information off of. So I hope you all will go to sageofquay.com. Where did that name come from?
It's a long story in a way.
Okay. What's a Quay?
A Quay is a part of a name of a town that I live in. And it's a nickname of a town that I live in. And the sage part of it was my family would tease me because I was getting into all this research stuff. And they would just say, it's the sage again. They would just say that. And it was basically kind of like poking at me a little bit, but in jest. It's, it was my family. It wasn't bad stuff. So I just took the sage part that they were poking me about, and I took the nickname for the town. I just put them together, and that was it. That's how it came to be. I wasn't even sure I liked the name, and then people just said, "No, I like it. Keep it." And it just stuck with me.
Wow, Mike, you and I are so much alike. It's pretty astounding. So, folks, I hope you will head on over to Sage of Quay, and of course, come on over to freemantv.com and subscribe. Check all the stuff that I have. 13 years of backlogs for you to research, weird videos, articles, all kinds of stuff. I try to keep it all going, and I try to keep you informed constantly on my Twitter feed. As many of you know, this is my last bastion of social networking. I've been banned, blocked, and just barricaded from every way, shape, or form of getting to you guys. I am blocked from almost every show that would, lift me. And anyway, I'm down to Twitter now. So if you want to follow me, it is at Freeman TV. And this is where you will find all my thoughts of the day and all of the articles that I think are relevant and important and will prep you for the show. As you see, I follow everything along line. So anyway, I hope to see many more of you over there following me at Freeman TV on Twitter, coming over to freemantv.com, checking out the host of stuff that is there, and then get on over to Sage of Quay and get deeper and deeper into the crazy conspiracies that just no longer are secrets, folks. We have moved into the post-conspiracy era. So it's out in the open, folks. All you got to do is believe it. We will see you on the other side or next week. Thank you so much for tuning in.